All right, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from Street Scores, and man, today is going to be a very busy day. I'm gonna try to see how many videos I can get done today. I'm hoping I can do at the very least 2, but I would love it if I can get like 3 or 4 done. But we're already at like 3 p.m., so we'll see how that goes. But in this video, we're talking about how the Washington Commanders have signed quarterback Tim DeMorat. I think that's how you pronounce it. Tim DeMorat. I think that's how you pronounce it. He's a guy who threw for 4,891 yards and 56 touchdowns in this past 2022 season, man. There's some ceiling there. Now, granted, it was a low level of competition. Maybe it's another Bailey Zapp situation. We'll see. But he's very intriguing, and I know at the very least, even as a Georgia Bulldog fan, he better make this roster over Jake Fromm. So we got to dive into him and what he's bringing to the table. What is his build like? Is he athletic? Does he have a strong arm? What are his weaknesses and strengths? All of that type of stuff. And then we also got to talk about all of the more undrafted free agent signings that we've made since the last time I made my video where I talked about like 8 or 10 of them. Now we've added like 6, 7 more. And I want to run down the list of like 7 rookie camp invites that we brought in. Guys that are technically not signed, but they're coming to our rookie mini camps to see if they can get a chance to make the team and get signed. They're coming in for tryouts. They're going to work their tails off to try to fight for a contract and get on this team, at the very least a 90-man roster going into training camp and all of that. And remember, this season they've changed it back to where we basically go from 90-man roster down to 53-man roster all at once, instead of the section by section where it's like we erase 10, then we erase 10, then we go to 53. I believe they changed it back to normal. We ran that other way for like a couple of years. Now we're back to just going from 90-man roster to 53 right before the regular season. But yeah, man, we're gonna dive into all of these players to see which ones may be sleepers, which ones may be steals, which ones are most likely to even make the team. And it may not just necessarily be because of how talented they are, but because that is a position of need right now and there's an open spot. So we're gonna dive into all of that and more. But before we do, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell next to the subscription button so you get notification immediately and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you pull up to the live stream again. I was waiting for my throat to feel better the past couple of days, and then today is in Tuesday. I'm extremely busy. I'll be a little busy tomorrow as well, but I'm gonna try to see if I can get this live stream scheduled and done with y'all, where I open up the phone lines, y'all call in, and we're gonna do a draft review and grades and all of that and opinions for each pick, the overall draft and all of that together. So I'm opening up the phone lines, and you can ask whatever questions you may have for me, and you may also, you know, voice your opinions or whatever. I'm gonna have to probably really be strict with the 3-minute timers because I'm pretty sure a lot of people are gonna want to call in. So make sure you pull up with your notes ready. Also be on the lookout for all of the film sessions I'm gonna do for everybody that we drafted, and maybe even some of these intriguing undrafted free agents that we have brought in. So make sure you stay tuned for all of the content. And I still got to do the Braden Daniels individual breakdown video, weaknesses, strengths, fit on the team, all of that type of stuff. That's on the way, but it's just so many other things I got to knock out first. So without further ado, let's get it.
You tell your family you're gonna be a commander.
So the most intriguing undrafted free agent that the Commanders have signed, at the very least since the last time I did my previous video where I talked about the first half of them that we signed, and you can easily argue that the Penn State transfer receiver from Western Kentucky, speaking of Bailey Zapp, he went for 1,400 receiving yards with Bailey Zapp and transferred to Penn State, didn't have as great of a season, and that's why he kind of fell off and people don't really realize how talented he truly is. That's why I did a highlight video entitled it, "Is he the next Jahan Dotson?" I mean, he's a really talented player. And then you also have the UCLA kick returner, punt returner, wide receiver that's also very intriguing as well. So if you haven't checked that video out, go ahead and watch that for those guys. But then we signed a few more since then, since like the past couple of days. Or was that yesterday? I don't know. I've been doing so much, I don't even realize if that was yesterday or not. May have been, I don't know. But either way, the Commanders have agreed to terms with Fordham quarterback Tim DeMorat, and he's from Fordham. I know he at least went to the college. I'm not exactly sure where he was born and raised. Fordham is just one of them parts that's just all the way up there in the Bronx that I haven't spent much time around, but shouts out to him. I've been in the Bronx a lot, spent a lot of days and time in the Bronx, but Fordham is just kind of up there. I mean, the only reason I've ever really had to go all the way up there, I guess, is for the Bronx Zoo. That's really it. But the most intriguing thing about him is that he threw for 4,991 yards and 56 touchdowns for the Fordham Rams in 2022. Of course, since he's playing for a team that's in New York City, of course the level of competition isn't great. And you can argue it may be like a Bailey Zapp type of situation, but at the same time, one of the biggest problems with Bailey Zapp is that he's a smaller quarterback. quarterback. This guy is 6'4", 220 pounds, like the prototypical size that you want in a quarterback. Like he's 1 inch taller and 2 pounds heavier than a CJ Stroud versus a Bailey Zapp who was really small, and that's why he struggled, or at least one of the main reasons. There were a plethora of reasons that he struggled, because just because you're small doesn't mean you can't be a good quarterback, but that was one of the main reasons. And it's really only height with Bailey Zapp, honestly. He's 6'1", and of course a lot of people prefer their quarterbacks to be like 6'3", 6'4", we'll see. But he is 220 pounds. He's not just like a tiny guy. He's not like Bryce Young, but he is shorter. But again, the guy we're talking about today, Tim DeMorat, I hope that's how you pronounce it. I'm just gonna call him Tim for the rest of the video. 6'4", 220 pounds. That's pretty interesting. He probably has the frame to add a little bit more weight if he wanted to. But yeah, first of all, like I said in the intro, the main reason I'm happy about the signing is because this guy has a good chance of dethroning Jake Fromm for that third spot in the quarterback group. Even as a Georgia Bulldog fan, I do not understand why we still have Jake Fromm on roster. If anything, I'd prefer to bring back Steven Montez. I'd prefer to give one of y'all a chance that's watching this video of having Jake Fromm basically being 2 injuries away from us having to play him in regular season games. The only advantage to having Jake Fromm starting for us is that he makes our path to Caleb Williams so much easier. I mean, he's the guy, again, that made Bobby McCain look like an all-pro safety, giving him 2 interceptions in 1 game. And he was trying his hardest. He was out there really, really trying. And so, hey, man, as long as we can just move Jake Fromm at the very least down the depth chart, I'm happy. I don't want to be 2 injuries away from Jake Fromm unless we're really diving in headfirst to Caleb Williams. And we're not going to do that. First of all, our team is too talented, even with Jake Fromm at quarterback. Even if I were running quarterback, and I'm definitely worse than Jake Fromm, even if I were at quarterback, with as talented as this team is, I don't think we're going to have the #1 overall pick to get Caleb Williams. We're just way too talented top to bottom. So it's just like, that's unrealistic in the first place to even think we're getting Caleb Williams, even if Jake Fromm is our quarterback. So there's really no purpose of having him. So we just have too high of a floor for really, no matter how bad our quarterback is, for us to be in the running for a Caleb Williams. So if at the very least, I would prefer a guy like Tim from Fordham to go out there and be our third guy. If for some reason, somehow he does like the run, ends up getting hurt or whatever, and then Jacoby Brissett is like 4th down QB sneak god in the NFL. You never know what may happen with that, and he's a guy that likes to run a little bit as well. Both of those guys aren't primary runners, but you never know. I mean, I'm knocking on wood, I don't want either of those guys to get hurt, but if it were to happen, I would definitely prefer Tim from Fordham than Jake Fromm. We're going to talk about why. But just to let you know, he was set to go to the New York Jets on a rookie minicamp invite, like some of the guys we're going to talk about at the end of this video, where we have some guys coming to the Commanders rookie camp invite that aren't signed, but then he just decided, let me just go ahead and sign with the Commanders. He finished his college career with 13,461 passing yards, 123 touchdowns, and 39 interceptions, including an AP FCS All-American and 3-time Patriot League Offensive Player of the Year. So if you want to dive and try to get some talent from the FCS, not the FBS, this is literally the best offensive talent that could potentially come from there. I know it's a very low level of competition, but you can easily argue he's the best player outside of the FBS that you could potentially land. And again, with us technically having a need for a third string quarterback, because again, I don't want to see Jake Fromm out there for any circumstances, I will take him. And I think he's quite likely to dethrone Jake Fromm as the third quarterback and actually make this roster. We'll see if he ends up being like a practice squad guy or something like that, but I feel like at the very least, he would be one of our top 3 quarterbacks if we try to keep. Also, just to let you know, we had an informal meeting with him at the Hula Bowl. So there was already interest there, and then we found a way to bring him in and sign him as an undrafted free agent. Also, you know Brugler is always on it. He's ready to analyze every single draft pick, undrafted free agent there is. And he said DeMorat must develop his eye discipline to be a consistent small window thrower in the NFL, but he is a functional athlete with the arm and intangibles to be a developmental option. So I'm telling y'all, expect to hear his name for a long time. He may be one of those guys that just lingers around for quite a bit. I mean, could you argue that maybe he's like a Chad Henne type of guy? Remember, Eric Bieniemy wanted to bring Chad Henne back, or at least take him with him to the Commanders if he could, but then Chad Henne decided to retire. Chad Henne is 6'3", 230. Again, this guy, Tim, is 6'4", 220, and he could probably add a little bit more weight. And you can argue that they have similar traits coming out of college. Now, granted, Chad Henne played for Michigan and not for Fordham University in the FCS, but still, if we're just going off of strengths and weaknesses, I like the Last Word on Sports.com's breakdown of them, because I agree. Based off of just a little bit I've watched, I'm not just going to say and act like I've watched hours and hours of what he's done, but from the little bit that I've seen, I agree with their exact synopsis. I mean, I may say a couple of other changes here and there, but they're basically saying he's like a lighter Drew Lock, which is really interesting because there's some arm strength there for sure. There's some athleticism where he's not the fastest guy, but I can see the Drew Lock as well. They said strengths: durable, played in 48 out of 51 games in 5 seasons. I think that's very notable. He's naturally athletic. He's a leader. Will call audibles at the line if necessary. That's big. That helps make your chances of making this team like way smoother if you're able to handle things like that, because even we didn't even really have Taylor Heineke do that much, and I'm not even sure if we're going to ask Sam Howell to do that, so I'm glad that he has that experience. Size and build of a prototypical NFL quarterback, of course, and then the ability to pick up yards with his feet on busted pass plays, and he's willing to recognize what's going on and go ahead and run for it if he has to, but it's not his main calling card. He's running to throw, which is one of my favorite traits about Sam Howell. Then his weaknesses: biomechanics become off kilter if he has to leave the pocket. That's something that you can develop. He holds on to the ball too long. I feel like Eric Bieniemy and those guys could teach him out of that. Comes from a smaller conference, again, the Patriot League Conference. Fordham University in the Bronx. He played for a school in New York City. There isn't even enough space for football fields out there like that. Of course, it wasn't a strong level of competition. He does not like throwing over the middle, and we're going to have to work on that because that's a serious issue. Now, Russell Wilson has made a career out of it, but then it got exposed last year for the Denver Broncos, so you got to worry about that. That's probably the weakness that scares me the most. And then his accuracy and consistent ball placement is an issue. Sometimes he's pretty accurate, really accurate at times, drops it right in the bucket, and then sometimes it's like, what happened? So a lot of that is more than likely just mechanics and not necessarily like a true accuracy arm issue type of thing. We could just work on the footwork there, and I think he could end up being a pretty good player. I mean, at the very least, he should be able to beat out Jake Fromm for that 3rd spot, right? Or am I tripping? So moving on to the other undrafted free agents that we got, because we're already like 15 minutes into recording this video. Golly, I didn't realize I was talking about them that long. I didn't even do as deep of a dive as I wanted to. Maybe I'll do another video to dive in deeper. But also, we signed wide receiver Bryson Tremaine out of Stanford, and there's some level of competition for you right there. Now, this guy is intriguing because so far, out of all of the undrafted free agents that I've covered up to this point, him and only one other guy are the taller, bigger receivers that I was almost sure we were going to take towards the end of the draft, or at the very least bring in some priority undrafted free agents to fill that role, because out of the like 11 wide receivers, remember I had the list of 125 prospects that the Commanders had confirmed interest in. Out of the 11 receivers, like 8 of them were 6'3" or taller, 6'4", 6'5", and that's why I wanted somebody like a Jake Bowa out of UCLA, but he ended up going somewhere else. I forgot where, but this is another one of those tall guys, 6'4" and 1/8", 205 pounds, 33.5-inch arms, and then 9 5/5-inch hands. And then he had 21 reps on the bench press, which is very interesting for a tall receiver. I mean, it's long arms that long for any position group. 21 reps is insane. So, I mean, maybe he could eventually become like a really good blocker for us if we need him to. I mean, people were talking about transitioning Cam Sims to tight end. This guy has a way easier chance of doing that with the type of strength he has. And then he had a 4.63 40-yard dash, which isn't great, but at 6'4", I mean, you can't really complain too much. First of all, I mean, he's going to be a possession receiver anyway. We're bringing him in to potentially replace Cam Sims. And again, with all of the guys that we were interested in leading up to the draft process and things like that, I'm surprised we didn't draft the guy, but I'm glad that we're bringing in some guys at the very least as undrafted free agents. Remember, Cam Sims was an undrafted free agent as well, and so we do have technically a hole on the team there. If you're talking about the easiest path to making this team, is arguably out of all of the undrafted free agents we've signed, even including the quarterback I just spent 13 minutes talking about, arguably, well, I feel like easily being a tall possession catch receiver is your best chance, because there's no Cam Sims anymore, and then everybody else is 6'1" or shorter, and then you have the guys in the tight end group, but that's it. Out of the receiving group alone, we have no tall receivers. And so that's like the quickest path and the easiest path to making this team, but you still got to go out there and show that you prove it. And also, I feel like that 4.63 40 time, I feel like that's a bad time. From what I've seen a little bit on tape, I feel like he runs faster than that and plays faster than that on tape. So he's somewhat of like an athletic freak that we can definitely develop, and he can beat you further down the field than you would expect out of a 6'4" receiver. So I'm really excited about him, and I really like his route running potential. Now, he didn't necessarily run a lot of routes yet. He's still pretty raw there, but he does a good job of staying low coming out of his breaks and things like that. And that's really hard to teach guys, especially a guy that size. And so I think we have a lot of tools to work with here. Feel like he's a nice baller clay at the receiver position, and he's quite likely to make the team if he goes out there and balls out. Shouts out to ProFootballNetwork.com. Their overall synopsis about him is that he's a terrific receiver who possesses reliable hands, and that's really important. As a receiver, catching is the most important thing. He has great concentration, that's hard to teach, and he's a tough guy attitude. His tape is outstanding, and while he struggles separating through routes, Tremaine offers enough pass catching skill to make a roster as a possession receiver, third down target, and red zone threat. Again, the only ones like that we technically have on roster are in the tight end group, and even none of those guys are like sure things. I mean, I love the talent of Cole Turner. I love the potential of Armani Rogers. I'm intrigued by Curtis Hodges, but it's not like we have a certified dominant red zone threat already on the roster. We have guys that I hope can be that, and we have guys that have the talent to be that and I think could be that, but we don't have a guy that we already know will be that for sure in 2023. So they may not take a chance, and if this guy is balling out in this offseason leading up to training camp and things like that, it's quite likely that he could be the guy that makes the team. He's competing with another undrafted free agent that's pretty tall as well, in Jalen Sample, the wide receiver from Minnesota State. And Jalen Sample is 6'6", but at the same time, his tape is nowhere near as good as Bryson Tremaine's. Bryson Tremaine is easily, by far, the most impressive receiver between the two if we're just looking at what they did in college. But again, Jalen Sample is 2 inches taller, so if they're really looking for that taller guy, he could be that. But again, Tremaine's tape is so good, and even though he's 2 inches shorter, he plays bigger anyway. So if I had to bank on either of those two guys making the roster, whether it's none of them or both of them or one of them, I think it's quite likely that Bryson Tremaine actually does make it, because again, he fits a specific need that the Commanders have that nobody else can fill right now. And Jalen Sample, I just don't really see. He's just too raw. I mean, he has some potential there, but Bryson Tremaine looks like, I mean, he could contribute on the field right now. And I'm actually a little surprised that he didn't get drafted. And then next up, we also signed former Hawaii wide receiver Zion Bowens, and his RAS is not great at all. He had a 3.72, and that just barely under 6 feet tall. You gotta be able to run faster than a 4.56 to really intrigue people, but that's a decent time. His 20-yard split was probably the most impressive thing he's done athleticism wise, testing wise, which was a 2.58, which was in the 8.22 percentile. And then he had a really good bench with 17 bench. That's easily the most impressive thing he did athletically on his entire RAS situation. Everything else he tested pretty poorly, which brought his grade down. But I feel like on tape, he's more athletic than it looks just from if you're looking at his RAS score. Again, I haven't watched a lot of them. I'm not going to sit and act like I've watched hours and hours of any of these guys that we just brought in as undrafted free agents. They're undrafted free agents for a reason. But they have a lot of potential, and from the little bit I've seen, I feel like his RAS score is not a good representation of who he actually is on the field. His main problem is that he's been hampered with injuries throughout his college seasons, and he has a 12.2% drop rate. But outside of that, man, if you're looking at the tape at 5'11", 182 pounds, he's explosive, man. He has it in him. He definitely has it in him. It looks like it on tape. I don't know what happened when he did his testing, because I feel like his 40-yard dash should have been better. His vertical and his broad jump should have been better. But the fact that he benched 17 pounds shows that he worked his tail off to get stronger, and he could contribute as a blocker at the very least and compete for a roster spot just because of that. Is it likely that he makes the team? I'm not exactly sure, but there's definitely a ball of clay there that we can work with. And then also the Commanders signed Nick Whiteside, the cornerback from Saginaw Valley State. He's a really intriguing guy. He's 6'1", 205 pounds. I know some people wish that is the exact size that Emmanuel Forbes was. A lot of people wish Emmanuel Forbes was 6'1", 205 pounds, but I'm telling you, if he was as elite as he was with all of his traits, like his tape, taking the ball away, being a ball hawk, as fast as he is, as quick as he is, running under a 4.4 and things like that, if he was able to do all of that, literally be the exact same player, and he's 6'1", just like Nick Whiteside. But if he was 205 pounds instead of the supposed 166 that people have him as, even though it's being reported that he's at 180 now, and that's fine with me. But if he was 205 pounds and that's it, that's all you changed on him, everything else was still Emmanuel Forbes, he would have went top 8. Him and Devon Witherspoon would have easily been neck and neck as the best cornerbacks in this class. Emmanuel Forbes has literally everything you want except for the weight. And again, the weight doesn't really worry me, so he may arguably be still at 16. He should have never made it that far. It was literally only because of the weight, and I'm sure some teams didn't even have him on their big boards because of it. So it's really interesting that Nick Whiteside is the exact size and weight that you would want, but he's nowhere near the athlete. He has nowhere near the tape. And so he's an interesting guy that, I mean, we could take a look at out of Division II. Just like if you want to say that Tim from Fordham, Tim DeMorat is arguably the best offensive player in D2 last year, you can easily argue that Nick Whiteside was the best defender, or at the very least the best DB. So interesting that we brought him in to see, like, hey, can you hang with the big boys? Was all of that great tape that you put out there just because you were going against low level of competition, or can you really go out there against NFL level competition now? That's a big jump, and see what you can do. So I'm interested in Nick Whiteside because there's definitely some potential there. If we're arguing about tape, of course you got to factor in and grade on the scale and base it on who they win against. Emmanuel Forbes against the SEC is completely different than Nick Whiteside against Division II competition, obviously. But if we're talking about tape, so far out of everybody we've talked about today, Bryson Tremaine at receiver, Tim DeMorat at quarterback, and Nick Whiteside as a DB have the best tape out of probably anybody we're going to talk about in this entire video. And there's something to say about that. Even though it's low level of competitions, there's something to say about that, except for Bryson, I mean, because he was over there in the Pac-12. And then former Tulane tight end Will Wallace is signing with the Washington Commanders as well. He's interesting. I wasn't able to watch a lot on him, but I still wanted to report that we signed him. All I really know is that he's a 6'4" redshirt senior that weighs 205 pounds. So that's an interesting build for a tight end. He's going to come in and compete. I feel like at the very least he could be a decent camp body. I'm not exactly sure of his chances of making the actual team, but we'll see. I mean, again, coming from Tulane, that's not terrible competition. That's better than D2 and FCS, but you know, it's not like he played in the Big 10, Big 12, in the SEC and stuff like that. It's the American Athletic Conference, which isn't the best, but it's also not the worst like some of these other guys we're talking about. Then we also signed Missouri Western's DJ Sturgis. I think that's how you pronounce that. My fault. DJ Sturgis. And he won the Cliff Harris Award as the Small College Defensive Player of the Year, which is really interesting. So you can argue just based on awards that he's one of the most accomplished undrafted free agents that we're bringing in at 6'1", 202 pounds. Again, we clearly have a type at DB that we're bringing in as undrafted free agents. We ignored that when it came to Emmanuel Forbes because he's just that talented and he's that elite at so many different things. We would like forget it. But they clearly prefer guys that are at the very least 200 pounds if you're going to come in as an undrafted free agent. And so he's a really interesting prospect. Another guy, I didn't get to see a lot of tape on him just yet, but he's really intriguing. And so then the Commanders have officially announced the list of all of the undrafted free agents that we've signed. Wide receiver Casimir Allen, wide receiver Zion Bowens, offensive lineman Mason Brooks, quarterback Tim DeMorat, safety Xavier Henderson, defensive end Joshua Pryor, wide receiver Jalen Sample, safety Kendall Smith, cornerback DJ Sturgis, wide receiver Mitchell Tinsley, wide receiver Bryson Tremaine, and cornerback Nick Whiteside. We have officially talked about all of those guys. So and also, before we get up out of here, rookie minicamp invites include Mike Sawyer, the cornerback from Concord. I'm not even exactly sure where that is. Is that a local DMV thing? And then Wesley McCormick, cornerback out of West Virginia. Raymond Boone, defensive back out of Bowie State. I'm not surprised there. A lot of these guys are local guys. It makes sense. Brian Cobbs, wide receiver out of Utah State. Running back Brad Roberts from Air Force. I mean, we had to bring in somebody from the military. Quarterback Chase Bryce from Appalachian State, who's also going to the Falcons rookie mini camp as well. He's going to both because they're different weekends, but I already reported that in the previous video. And then also there's some reported interest in DeAnthony Jones, the edge from Houston. We'll see what happens there. We're going to monitor that situation. But yeah, man, everybody I just read are basically just rookie camp invites that are not signed yet. So that's why I'm not doing deep dives into them yet. But if we end up signing them, if they end up looking like something, I'll give them their own videos as well. And I still got to work on that Braden Daniels video too. I promise me. That's on the way. Trust me. But yeah, man, that's the end of the video. Please leave a like on this video if you liked it, if you learned anything. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Definitely appreciate the support, man. Shouts out to all of my sponsors, especially my Pro Bowl sponsors. Let me see scrolling on the screen right now. Again, be on the lookout for that draft review live stream where I'm gonna open up the phone lines for y'all to call in. Be on the lookout for all of my film sessions, especially for my channel members. Channel members are gonna get like the hour-long version. The general public will probably get like a quick 5 to 8 minute version that I just, you know, do like the major points. But if you want like the full deep dive film sessions, make sure you go become a channel member, because once things start to die down and I'm able to knock out all of these videos I need to knock out, we're gonna start diving into film sessions. But yeah, man, I appreciate all the support. I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm out.